This is the Tree of Life, Season 24, Chapter 2. In this episode, we will be talking about the mechanism of transformation of analog to digital structures within substitution events. To start out, throughout the recent seasons of these podcasts, we have discussed substitution events in a variety of forms. Simpliciter substitution events are those which transform an analog to a digital structure. This process is marked by infinite recursion, that is, each negation leads to a series of convoluted paths descending from the negation, occurring in parallel, which each describe further negation along those paths, which lead to more recursion, and so on and so forth. We have frequently described this process as a form of transformation of an analog structure to a digital one. But we haven't explained how. If you imagine an analog structure with two substitutionary impulses, impulse 1 and impulse 2, transforms into a digital structure, describing impulse 1 and impulse not 1. Then, we can see that the process of infinite recursion is a Riemann process, by which the initially negated impulse becomes the not set. The process of this is as follows. In each convoluted path descending from path parsimony, that is, the initial path, which describes affirmation of impulse 1 and negation of impulse 2, contains a subsequent negation, say impulse 3. And you imagine that the affirmed impulse in that secondary path is the affirmation of impulse 2. Then it is possible to see that as these convoluted paths descend from path parsimony, eventually at infinity, they will describe the full not set corresponding to impulse 1. Thus the process of infinite recursion transforms an analog structure to a digital structure through a Riemann process of recursion occurring in parallel to the path of parsimony. From this we can see that the fact that time parsimony incorporates all of these paths into the causal reordering is reflective of the fact that they belong to the not set, the digital structure juxtaposing negation of the not set with affirmation of the set. Thus, if you imagine that the subject is a member of a class of subjects, where impulse 1 is affirmed for that subject, the not set must describe the remainder of the class. In the last episode, we also talked about how each nested substitution event, preserved as specific word associations within the artifact of sublimation, possesses a window corresponding to its degeneration, namely the substitution period, which describes the transformation of the analog structure to the digital one. This window entails not just the single path of convolution, but all nested substitution events associated with infinite recursion. We also talked about how when these windows align they produce reciprocation. This reciprocation possesses the same negation, described in our example, thus is exclusionary to the set corresponding to infinite recursion describing the not set. Thus, we can see that these parallel substitution events produce dissonant spaces by linking common negation and affirmation of a particular pair of sets. In reverse substitution events, the negation follows the acquiescence. In these events, the incoming consciousness flows into the vessel after acquiescence, but before completion of the task, leaving before achieving the fruits of the task. In reverse substitution, we see the incoming consciousness acting out the acquiescence of the outgoing consciousness. Under hierarchical natural law, the priority entails the incoming consciousness being lower in the hierarchy. The outgoing consciousness retains the fruits of the incoming consciousness's labor. Thus, we see that this priority is ultimately about alienation of the power to sublimate. For hierarchy ensures that the task is completed without the need to sublimate by the outgoing consciousness. In other words, hierarchies compel the utilization of those lower in priority to complete tasks, without the outgoing consciousness having to sublimate to achieve the outcome. Thus they accumulate the benefits of that sublimation in the vessels higher in the hierarchy. In this way, we see that digital structures transform to analog structures, the substitution being as between the two consciousnesses within the vessel. That's the end of the podcast for today.